If you have been enjoying Edinburgh Business Stories and you want to keep up to date with some of the new episodes we've got coming out every other week, then why not subscribe? The stories, the guests we have are absolutely incredible and we wouldn't want you to miss out.
Frank, welcome. Welcome to Edinburgh Business Stories. But I think for today's episode and for today only, Alex, if you're all right with it.
I'm fine with it.
We're going to change EBS to ESS, which is Edinburgh Sports Stories, because okay. Frank, obviously you'll kind of tell us a little bit more about your life in sport. But I think whilst you're up here in Edinburgh and you've helped us earlier on today with our annual planning session, we thought we'd grab you and just do a bit of a special episode of Edinburgh Business Stories. So it's absolutely great to have you.
And thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, great to have you. Frank, give us just a snapshot of, we'll go back to the beginning in a minute, but give us a snapshot of your 1 minute elevator pitch of your career.
I was always in love with the idea of coaching. Decided to work on that. Was eventually fortunate enough to become Scottish national athletics coach, and then fortunate enough to become the chief coach for the United Kingdom. And so I had 4 Olympic Games in that position. I was a very lucky man because I had some very good athletes and very good coaches at that point. And that blossomed into being some kind of a coaching authority, I suppose, worldwide. Because not only was I in love with coaching athletes, I was in love with coaching itself. And that's what brings me here when I have a chance to work with Action Coach, of course. And it also has me working with World Athletics now to try to position coaching where it should be in the governance structure.
Amazing. So we've got you on Edinburgh Business Stories because ultimately you are from Edinburgh. So tell us some of your story right from the beginning.
Well, from the beginning, my dad joined the Royal Air Force and was at Biggin Hill during the Battle of Britain, and he left my mum up in Edinburgh, got engaged to her, but she travelled all the way down by bus to be with him at Biggin Hill, and they got married down there in Bromley. My dad was then posted to Drem, which was just outside North Berwick, and that's where he was stationed, and that's where I was born in North Berwick. And a little bit of story around that. So my mum and dad were not rich; they were very poor, in fact. And my dad didn't have an awful lot of money to spend on things like prams, and he went to his commanding officer at Drem, who was Peter Townsend, who some of you will remember was a very good friend of Princess Margaret, the late Queen's sister. And he spoke to his commanding officer, and his commanding officer bought me my first pram. So that was my first touch with royalty, folks.
Look at you. Very nice.
So I started off in there, and then my mum moved. My dad was posted elsewhere, and my mum moved into Edinburgh. But I said they had no money. And my early years in Edinburgh were in Buchanan Street in Leith, 22 Buchanan Street, which isn't the same place it was in these days, because we lived in the basement in a single end. Mr. Reid was at the other side in his single end. We shared an outside toilet there, and the window opened up onto the back green, and there was... it was not a very attractive back green. At one end, there was a sawmills, and there was also an air raid shelter in there, which unfortunately a lot of people use as a toilet. So that was my heritage, if you like, at that point, growing up in Edinburgh. But my mum was really obsessive about the fact that I needed to learn, and she wanted to make sure that I had a really good education. And so she got me into the Royal High School when it was at Jock's Lodge, the preparatory school. And she worked every hours that God gave her to have enough money to make sure that I could go there, that she could buy blazers and things. I think it was the only kid in Buchanan Street who had a school blazer. The other kids went to schools that didn't need such things. And it wasn't, obviously a beautiful place now, and no disrespect to Buchanan Street, but there were 2 or 3 murders that I remember when I was growing up in the street. But my mum prevailed there, got me through education. We moved then when my dad got demobbed. We moved up to Hillside Street, just off London Road. And that was handy because I was going to go to Royal High School, secondary school, which was the other side of the Colton Hill.
Yeah.
So there was the start of me getting fit, And my dad, I said they didn't have much money. And I came home one day when I was in secondary school and I said, Dad, the other boys have got spiked shoes to do their running. And I'd really like to have spiked shoes. And he said, well, that's a very good idea, son. I'll buy the left one if you buy the right one. And so that made me take a job doing milk deliveries and roll deliveries and newspaper deliveries in the morning. And because of that part, most of the places that was serving the milk and stuff were in tenements. Yeah. So before I went to school every morning, I was running up and down, doing about an hour's serious training, running up and down. So I was getting quite fit and all of this stuff. And eventually that led to me being in third place at the under-16 championships at Royal High School. And I was desperate to be in a school team because I was too skinny. I'd get knocked around every time I tried to play rugby. And this seemed to me to be an opportunity. I was really hungry to be something at that point because I wasn't very bright at school. And so having got stuck into that, I finished third in the under-16 half mile. But I had to be in the first two if I was going to get to run for the school. And so I got a hold of Martin Emsley. Evan Cameron was the guy that won the race. He went on to be a very prominent surgeon, by the way, here in Edinburgh. And I persuaded Martin to drop out of the half mile and just concentrate on the hurdles. I persuaded him he was far more suited to that than to half mile. And so I got my first school vest. And that was really a big turning point.
Very cunning there, Frank.
I realized I had an opportunity to be something in school. And next thing I got into I was able to go to the Scottish Schools Easter camp, which was at Largs. And it was the first year that Inverclyde opened up in Largs. And I still to this day remember going in the front door and I saw this giant coming down the stairs. And his name was Tony Chapman. And Tony was the Scottish national coach. And I learned in my week there, listening to him, talking about biomechanics and talking about techniques in long jump and high jump and stuff. I worshipped this guy because he knew all the things that I needed to ask questions about. And that transformed me. I became a serious student of what it is I was trying to do in sport. So much so that I ended up writing training programs for other guys in the school team. I remember a young lad called Eric Notariani. We loved training together, and I wrote his training programs. I always remember standing in the shower harmonizing with him, the Everly brothers, Kathy's Clown and stuff like that. You guys are far too young to remember these things. But I really got into the idea of coaching at that point. But really,
coaching wasn't a big thing. I mean, not that coaching's a well understood kind of concept now, but back.
No, you're absolutely right, and I really didn't honour my mum's work and my dad's work well because I didn't get the hires that I should have got. In fact, the first time I sat my hires and lowers that were at that point, I remember sitting in the hall as the rector read out what everybody got, and he missed my name out, and so I went and knocked on his door. And said, excuse me, Rector, I think you missed me. He said, no, you didn't get anything. So I really wasn't all that bright. And eventually I had another year at school and I did get qualifications, but not enough to go to Edinburgh University. And so I was going to try to be an actuary at that point.
Right.
So that's my dad's bright idea, God rest him, but that was his bright idea. And I remember, I think I got Part 1A, so it was with the Scottish Widows. I think I got Part 1A done. And I went for Part 1B, and I looked at the examination paper, and I took it up to the person that was invigilating and said, excuse me, I think I got the wrong paper here. I couldn't understand a word of it. I said, no, that's the right paper, Mr. Dick. Oh, great. So that was it. I was determined to do something else. But at the same time, a guy called Bob Hay, who was a student at Edinburgh University, who went on to he was one of the pioneers who operated on infants' mouths to do cleft palate.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first people in the world to do that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we're at university. He said, Frank, I want you to come and run for the university. I said, I can't get in. I don't have the qualifications. We'll find a way. And so I got in through a back door. I could be a non-matriculating student. And he had a great selling point in this. You'll have to attend a few lectures. Yeah, okay. He said, but you don't have to sit any exams. Oh, that's right up my street. I said, I'm definitely in for that. And so I ran for them. And we went, as a consequence of that, we went to the UEU Championships at Loughborough. And I finished second in the half mile to a guy called Dave Johnson. And Dave shared a room with a guy called Robbie Brightwell, who I knew from my junior days, because I got a junior record as a young athlete. And Robbie said, why don't you come to Loughborough? I said, well, I didn't think a Scottish boy could go to an English institution. I said, we'll find a way. And I have to tell you this part of the story. I couldn't swim. I hated swimming beyond words. Yeah. And you had to be able to swim to get to Loughborough. And so Robbie said, okay, all you have to do is keep Baz Stamatakis, who was the chief of physical education and was the top athletics coach. He said, keep him talking long enough because he'll run out of time and he'll probably ask you if you swim, just say yes, and he'll probably let you go, which is exactly what happened. There I was into Loughborough. And that really was, you speak about coaching. I was there to be a teacher of physical education. But to me, teaching and coaching, you could almost make them synonymous in my mind. Yeah. And I was learning so much from Jeff Gowan and from Baz Stamatakis that this was my love. When I was leaving Loughborough, as in so many other things in my life, I wasn't prepared for it. I hadn't even thought about what I was going to do next after Loughborough. And I went in to see Jerry Arterton, who was the college registrar, and he said, oh Frank, there's a school's come up here. You might be interested in it yourself, but if you could put it on the notice board. And I looked at it, and it was to be the Deputy Director of Physical Education at Worksop College, specialising in athletics and mathematics. And I said, I'll deal with that if you like, Jerry. I'll put it on the notice board. Can you imagine? It never went on any notice board. And that was it. I got a guy called John Coughlin, who's a very clever educator. He went on to be the General Secretary for the CCPR, the Central Council for Physical Education and Recreation at that point. And he took me on. And I was then in charge of athletics, writing athletics coaching programs for the kids in the school at every level. You won't believe this. Sunday night, I maybe started at about 6 o'clock in the evening, finished at 1 o'clock in the morning. I wrote a program out for every single athlete who was going to be in the junior, middle, or senior squads. And I would post it, and then that allowed me to go in. They would take ownership of their coaching programs, and I would go around and supervise bits and pieces. And then I had a thought, because at that point, there was no such things as degrees in physical education, but they were coming. And so we were going to have to be competing with people who had degrees, and we only had diplomas. And so I decided with a pal of mine, Bill Pink, we would go to the University of Oregon, because I wanted to study what Bill Bowerman did as a coach. Who's Bill Bowerman, you say? Well, I'll tell you who he was. You may know he made shoes for the athletes because he felt that Adidas and Puma and these guys, they weren't making the right kit. So he actually made the shoes himself on his waffle iron, which is why they were called waffle-soled shoes, right? Okay. Anyway, a young postgraduate business student came to Loughborough called Phil Knight.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nike.
And he said to Bill, I think we could do something with this.
Never.
And they went through the houses of Eugene, asking them to invest $100 or whatever it was. Yeah. And that was the start of Nike.
Brilliant.
So I was there for a year, and I loved this guy because he was the first person that I came across who wasn't just looking at the technical aspects of coaching. He had a people aspect at all, understanding how people operated. And he came out with some crazy armchair psychology stuff. That I remember when he had the introductory stuff, and we were all sat there worshipping this guy. And he said, you know, if you miss a session, you don't double up the next day. Hey, if you miss your breakfast, you don't have 2 lunches, do you? So I loved this kind of wisdom that came out of it, human stories.
Yeah.
And as you know, Alan, the ability to get language and find analogies.
Yeah.
This to me was going to be the key of how you communicate better in life. Find the language, find analogies, create metaphors, and tell stories. Right, and that to me was going to be the big key. Came back home, and I was going to go back into teaching, but I was.
How old are you at this point, Frank?
28, I think, 27 or 28, I think.
And do you mind if I just pause for a second? Because a few things stand out as well. One is your ability to recall names is impressive.
Yeah, I was thinking that. I was like, wow, I remember everyone's name.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, because you remember the people that matter, I think, that change your life.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Sorry,
sorry.
I've got a quick question. I've got two questions. One is, that's the point about names. The other one is, when you were delivering milk, I don't suppose you bumped into Sean Connery, because he was also a milkman, wasn't he, in Edinburgh?
Well, it's funny you should say this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right, no, genuinely, right.
Because at one point he was with Edinburgh and Dumfriesshire Dairies, right?
Yeah.
And his milk float went past George Norwell's, who was in charge of my milk float, in Royal Terrace in Edinburgh, just above London Road Gardens.
That's right.
So same kind of generation.
Look at that. So and then the other observation maybe is just listen to the way you're telling the stories. There's like a lot of cunning in your career so far.
I think,
I mean that in a jovial way.
You're right, but you know how much I believe in the idea you have to find a way.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of being dishonest or telling lies and things. It's a matter of finding a way to sell yourself forward to make sure that something happens.
And I use cunning because the 3 examples, obviously, kind of persuading the guy to kind of go into a different sport so you can get the second. The other one then was what's that? The swimming story that you told, plus then that leaflet that never quite made it to the notice board. But they're all quite big moments, I guess.
I hope that nobody thinks that makes me dishonest. But I'd like you to think that it mattered enough to me, to go to do whatever it took. Anyway, I came back home to go back to Worksop College because I'd had 2 years there. I was going to come back again, and I was restless. I really liked what I'd seen across in the States. And I was eventually offered a fellowship by a guy called Robert Osborne, who was the head of educational psychology in the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And I was offered this, and I accepted it. And went up to see my mum and dad here in Edinburgh to say goodbye to them, because that was it. I was going to go and live in Canada and be a Canadian, and that was going to be my life. And I was all set to go. And I was walking along Princes Street, and I don't know why I was going up Lothian Road, just a chance. And who should be coming down the Lothian Road at exactly the same time as Tony Chapman, that guy who's the national coach when I went to the schoolboys course. And he said, "Hey, Frank, do you know that John Anderson's he's resigned as Scottish national coach?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Why don't you apply for the job?" I said, "No, I've said goodbye to my mum and dad now. I've made up my mind. Hey, I'm going to be living in Vancouver. I'm really looking forward to that." I said, Frank, why don't you apply for it for a laugh and see what happens?" So I did, and they offered me the job. Now, something that you should understand is I did not have a coaching qualification at this point.
Right.
I'd studied more than you can ever imagine. Yeah. In fact, I think studied about coaching, what was happening in East Europe and so on, far more than most of the coaches who were already established. And they said to me, "We'll wait for you to get the jobs open until you get your qualification." So I got it, and then there I was, Scottish national coach. That's the first. I've already given you an example of a crossroads in life. and that was meeting Robbie Brightwell, or one before that, Bob Hay, right? I believe life's full of these things.
Yeah.
You come to a crossroads and you meet somebody, and that will change what you do. It'll change your whole life at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I was now in Scotland, and I had imposter syndrome, as you can imagine. I was looking at guys out there that were serious coaches. I mean, they'd coached Olympic athletes, and here am I, I'm the national coach, supposed to be their boss, and I went nowhere near these guys. You know? Mm-hmm. And so I kept on believing that if I kept studying and kept working, I could make a difference. And I kind of, without knowing this at that time, had started a learning journey. Yeah. You know, there's a hierarchy of learning in life. You start off learning to repeat, right? What other people have done, because it's tried and tested. You can't make too many mistakes at that, right? And you work on that, and you begin to adapt it a little bit for the people that you're working with and helping to shape. And then you learn to learn, right? That's the next step. So learning to learn was partly listen to guys like the FBI boy, Fred Wilt, who lived in great address, 2525 Kickapoo Drive, Indiana. And he wrote a magazine called Track Technique. And in it, there was always a feature called How They Train. It was world record holders and so on. And this was learning to repeat, right? Picking this stuff up. But there was also a magazine from Australia, Jess Jarver and Jack Prosser were, I mean, I never had the privilege to work with, to meet them. I met one of their athletes a little bit later in life. If we've got enough time, I'll come back to that. Yeah. And they wrote this stuff that was very digestible, and with loads of examples about coaching, and it was on a monthly basis, and I was learning so much from them. So I was shifting from learning to repeat to learn to learn. And then just for the record, the next levels after that are you learn to do, then you learn to be, and ultimately you learn to become. And that's, for you guys, the same as for me. That's our journey in how we learn. And we must be prepared to go to these next steps. And which is why, as you well know, I believe a winning culture is founded on a learning culture, right? So I'm now up in Scotland, enjoying myself. We'd had the most fantastic Commonwealth Games in '78, and by that time, after '76 Olympics, UK had a terrible Olympics, 1 bronze medal from Brendan Foster, and afterwards they had something called the Wembley Convention, where they brought the whole sport together. And out of that, somebody was going to be asked to rewrite the coach education program. And nobody else in the national coaching family wanted to do it, and that was dumped on me. And so I had the chance to shape the whole future of UK coach education in Scotland. I could trial it in Scotland. And I didn't know how long I was going to be there. This is 1976. So that's what I was going to do. I got stuck into that. And I modelled that on what I'd seen from Canada and what I was seeing from Finland at that point. So I was well into this. It then came to, also at that point, they decided at the convention that they would no longer have 2 principal national coaches leading. They would have 1 director of coaching. So hold that in your head. So everything's going. 78, the Edmonton Commonwealth Games, fantastic occasion, gold medals all over the place. And at this point, I had Scottish athletics eating out of my hand. Any committee I went to, everything would work and so on. And I remember I got a call from Harry Wilson, who was Steve Ovette's coach. Right? And Harry was going to be in Glasgow. I think it's where the Hilton is now, just, Charing Cross area, up there. And he was going to be in there and asked me if I'd like to come and have dinner with him. So fine. And I remember this day really well because I was living down in the Cramond area and I'd gone down for some reason to the shore. And as I went down to the shore, I could see in the horizon, it was a beautiful sunny day. The Forth looked fantastic. You could see you could actually see as far as the Law and the Bass Rock. And I looked north and you could see the white snow-capped Grampians up there. And I was in heaven, everybody was doing what I wanted them to do. Wasn't this great? Anyway, Harry sat down for dinner and said, Frank, you've not applied for the director of coaching's job. I said, no, Harry, why would I? I mean, look at it. I don't know if you saw Scotland this morning, but who would want to live anywhere else? This is absolutely fantastic. I love it. Mm-hmm. He said, and I'm in charge. I mean, I can get anything I want. When there's a new director, you will be under his umbrella and you'll have to do what he or she says. That's not going to happen, Harry. He said, well, your choice. Another crossroads. So I applied for the director's job and I got the director's job. Mm-hmm. Right. And that led to 4 Olympic Games. A desperate, that exercise of coach education led me to understand that there were 2 things I had to be thinking about in life. And that was not just how you develop coaches, but how you develop coaching, because they're 2 quite different concepts. Mm-hmm. Right? I served my time. I'll tell you exactly what happened. I was coaching a young boy called Dalton Grant. I'd had some fantastic athletes at that point, Daley Thompson and so on.
And can we at one point go back to the Meadowbank story as well? Just when you're mentioning Daley Thompson, I'll remind you.
Okay,
go on.
So I was coaching this young boy called Dalton Grant. Mm-hmm. Now, Dalton was crazy. I mean, every now and again, you'll find an athlete who is absolutely off the wall. I mean, just does things that nobody else would dare do. I mean, I have to say, recently you've got one in rugby called Finlay, and he lives on a different planet. He really does. A little bit like the coach did once upon a time. I always felt that Gregor was a genius because he was the team at the same time as Gavin Hastings. These boys, we don't often get them, but 2 geniuses on the team at the same time. And along comes Finn Russell. And I remember having this conversation with Gregor because when he started off doing his coaching, he very kindly asked me if he could meet with me, and pretty well on a monthly basis down in London, and we'd talk about kind of mentoring. He was sharing his experiences. I was saying what I thought about them and so on, and what could be done better and so on. But I could tell, and it doesn't often happen when you've got a really genius athlete, I could tell that he was going to be a brilliant coach. He really was insightful in his thinking and so on. Anyway, where did I got to on that one?
Dalton.
So Dalton Grant. Yeah, Dalton was a genius. So, for example, this is the kind of thing he would do. His best jump of the year might have been 2 meters 28, right? So he'd go into an Olympic Games and pass at 2:28 and start at 2:31, 2 meters 31, a jump that he'd never done in his life before. And he's in an Olympic Games. And it used to frighten the pants off me, that. But he actually thrived on it. He wanted it to be something that he'd never done before, right? He's wearing a British vest. He's going to have to do that. Please don't. And I'd gone to the European Indoor Championships, and that was that kind of competition. Right. And he'd never jumped 2 meters 35, but he'd never jumped 2 meters 33, and he missed that out because it was only a head-to-head with him and the French boy in front of a French crowd. Can you imagine that? In Paris? The Palais de Bercy stadium it was. And I'm watching him, and he won the competition at 2 meters 37, a new European indoor record as well as a British one. And I remember, but at that point, I'd already been asked to work with coaches, athletes in other sports, Boris Becker, Katharina Witt, and at this point, Gerhard Berger, who was driving Formula One. Mm-hmm. And I was going to fly, I think it was Varig Airways from Paris to Rio, and to work with him for a week. And I got to the airport, got on a plane. At this point, I'd been asked to chop my budget by British Athletics. We'd done things that nobody ever thought we could do. We'd won a European Cup. Nobody ever thought we could do that. Harry Wilson in particular said it'll never happen in your life. But we'd won that. We'd done all of that. And then British Athletics were in financial difficulties, and they wanted to cut my budget. we'd gone from being not even in the first division of Europe, and that was a stone in my shoe, I have to say. So I'm sat in the plane, and I did what I always do, get into my tracksuit because I want to have a good sleep. I ordered a Bucks Fizz. That came down. I reached up to my briefcase, pulled out my pad, and I wrote a letter of resignation. Put it back in my pad, put it back up again, had my champagne and my Bucks Fizz, and went to sleep. When I came back home again, I followed through on it. One of the guys in the press said, "You only did this to persuade them get them to persuade you to stay." So why would I do that? Why would anybody in life do that? If you've made a decision to go, you go. Because what would it make you if you came back in again, having said you're going to abandon it? So that was it. I was out, and instead of coaching in track and field, I was working with quite a few athletes from different other sports, Justin Rose and people like that, which was really good fun. And then I was being tempted to come and speak to business groups.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember actually when I was the chief coach in 1984, and when the Olympic accommodation, I think it's going to be the same in 28, by the way, was at UCLA campus at Westwood. Hollywood's just up the road. So I'm walking across the campus because the board couldn't afford to get all the coaches that I had in my staff into the village. I persuaded a dormitory, one of the dorms in fraternity. There's a fraternity house, and we took that place over, and I got all of my coaches in there, and also coaches who were not with the team but wanted to be there with their athletes, because I thought after a day's work we could actually share information and develop our coaching understanding through that. I'm walking towards there, and it suddenly dawned on me. I could almost take you to the slab on the square outside the basketball hall, where the light suddenly came on. Coaching is not just about sport. Coaching is everywhere, whether you're a parent, whether you're a developer, a HR or a human capital developer in business. It's all the same. It's the same principles.
So why did it come to you at that point?
I think. Well, actually, I haven't thought about this before. Just before I went, Abbey Life or Abbey National asked me to do a piece to camera that they were going to use, I think, in Budapest at a conference in 1984. And when I was there, one of the chaps who was part of the whole thing was in time manager, that organization, and he had this lovely folder, and in it were something like the stuff that you do, your goals, your year plans, all the way down to what you do each day. It was all in this book, and I'm thinking to myself, I do that all the time. That's my life, planning like that and making sure that athletes deliver on the day. And so I persuaded this guy to give me his time manager. Well, not his, but he sent one through to me. And because I'd done this, and because I'd seen the link, it was that moment that it's actually these skills are transferable. Yeah. And you, if you'd met me that time, would have been quite entitled to say, Frank, what do you know about business? You know nothing. Yeah. You have to get other people to look after your money because you can't look after it yourself. I said, yeah, I understand that, but listen, I don't know anything about tennis, but I can work with Boris Becker, right? I don't know anything about ice skating, but I can work with Katarina Witt, right? And that's not me. I'm not showing off about this, but what I'm trying to say is that the principles of developing other people are not just technical ones. For the most part, they're people ones. Yeah, you know, and that's what got me thinking that I could take this into business. Yeah. So when I did resign, a chap called Geoffrey Hamilton Fairley wanted to look after the business side for me. There's no reason why you should know him, but his father, Gordon Hamilton Fairley, and you may remember this when you were much younger reading about this, he lived in the Chiswick area, and he went out one day with his dog, his Alsatian dog, I think it was, for a walk. He went to his car, and the IRA had put the bomb under the wrong car. Oh. It was meant for a judge. And this guy, who was the guy who created chemotherapy, Gordon, check it up, Gordon Hamilton Fairley, was touted to be the Queen's next physician, gone, like that. Geoffrey's mum got apologies and things. I get all of that, and I can understand why people do these things and the causes and so on. I get all of that, but what a loss. Anyway, Geoffrey had that kind of background, and he was going to look after me. And I remember him saying to me, Frank, in 6 weeks you'll wonder why you didn't do this 6 years ago, and he was right. You know, he was right. And that got me into a world. It encouraged me. I'd already written a book called Winning by this time. Yeah. And that was me arrogantly thinking that what we knew in sport was something that you guys in business needed to know. Yeah. But I subsequently wrote another book called Winning Matters. And by that time, I'd learned that you knew more about coaching than an awful lot of my world knew about coaching. And so that's what made the second book, I think, mean that little bit more than the first book did.
And what made you realise that then?
Just the fact that you guys were taking it far more seriously. We were taking it for granted. You know, you were looking at what were the behaviour changes that you needed in people that would make a difference, and the methods that you would do, you could use it. It was from the world of business, not from the world of sport, that people were using a questioning technique. And asking the right questions, because I know you've heard me saying this before. It's not about the people that give the right answers. It's the people who ask the right questions, because that encourages the person that you're coaching to be actively involved in their development. Okay, so and that kind of brings us almost up to date. I felt very strongly that coaches in sport are not properly respected in general. And that should change. And one of the things I worked on, I wrote it in 2011, was the coach's charter. And the coach's charter gave coaches 8 sets of rights and responsibilities. Right. So, for example, a coach the first right is a coach has got a right to education. Right? The coach has got a right to a qualification. The coach has got a right to a contract. The coach has got a right to compensation. The coach has got a right to be respected. The coach has got a right to create and belong to a professional body. Now you might say, well, surely these are very obvious rights. I'm telling you now, they were not obvious. They still are not obvious rights in the majority of sports. But in working with World Athletics, I'm pretty sure we're close to getting that over the line for World Athletics. And I think when that happens, I'll feel that that's been part of a mission in life accomplished. I think we'll get that part.
Where did you start with, what was like the moment where you transitioned from being the runner into the coach? Like, was there a really obvious moment where you said, you know, actually, I think coaching's for me, not being the athlete?
No, it was fused to begin with, because I was trying to I was thinking I was one thing, but was actually something else. And when I left school, and there didn't seem to be much future other than trying to be an actuary, and I actually went. I must tell you the story. I went back. I was invited by Scottish widows who knew nothing about this, by the way, that had ever worked for them. And I went back and had been invited to speak to the actuaries. And I said to them, you know, I found a problem was this. There was only 3 kind of actuaries. There was those who could count and those who couldn't. And nobody laughed, you know. They're a pretty serious bunch. Nobody laughed. I thought I was really being clever at this one.
And Frank, tell us. I said at one point we could maybe go back to what I would refer to as the Meadowbank story as well, and it's obviously Daley Thompson's story has just been out on, was it Netflix or Prime? Can't remember. And you feature in that as well. I was looking out for you. But you tell a story. Well, you told me years ago about a particular incident with Daley in a hospital.
Oh, right.
Which I think is worthwhile people hearing.
Okay, well,
Right,
it was halfway through the decathlon in the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh in 86, would it be? Yeah, it was. 86, yes, it was. Daley never liked speaking to the media, and so he said, Frankie, you get the car out your other car park. Meet me outside the gates, and we'll get up to the village, which was Pollock Halls at that point. And so I rushed out of Meadowbank Sports Centre, which borders on, as you know, to the London Road, 4-lane carriageway, and I realised I just had enough time to get to the other side of the road before a bronze Super Mirafiore would meet me. So I launched across the road at incredible speed. Well, it was incredible speed for me. I'd only gone a few strides before there's a loud bang, a noise. And the lights went out and I'm staggering around, put my hand up to my face. There's just a damp patch, looked down, blood everywhere, and looked up. And somebody had erected a lamppost on a traffic island in the middle of London Road and hadn't had the presence of mind to tell me. Now, you'll meet many people who walk into lampposts. You'll meet very few who take a 30-metre approach run. So I'm staggering around the road. Daley came rushing out of the car park. He said, Who hit you? Who hit you? Was it Linford? He said, not this time, son. Here's the car keys. Get yourself up to the village. I'm going to have to go to the infirmary. He says, Frankie, I'm going to stick with you. Well, to cut a short story longer, we went back into Meadowbank Sports Centre and they phoned up the Royal Infirmary. Listen, Daley Thompson's coming to the casualty outpatients department. Oh no, has he hurt himself? No, it's not him, it's his coach, Frank Dick. Looks like he's broken his nose. So you know what Daley's like, you can cause bedlam out there, protect the patients. So the scene now moves to the casualty outpatients in the Royal Infirmary. Doors swing open. They've done a very good job. They put screens around the patients, a few arms and legs hanging around the side. You can't see the faces and they can't see us. And we've got a straight run through to the operating theatre, apart from one person, a little nurse. And to this day, I'm certain she'd practiced what she was going to say. But when she saw Daley Thompson on this shoulder and a giant of a guy called Greg Richards on the other, her little legs went to jelly. She came up to me, looked me straight in the eye, and she said, Hello, Mr. Nose, how's your dick? It took about half an hour to pick Daley off the hospital floor. You know? That's true, absolutely true story. And I don't think I told you the rest of it. The next day, of course, this doctor, Dr. Moran, I think he was, he sorted the nose and he put a bit of plaster on it. And I went down to Meadowbank because I remember I was the director of coaching at this point for the UK. I wasn't with a Scotland or England team because they were going to keep me separate. So I went round to the back straight and Daley bought tickets for all his family and pals along one particular row in the back straight of Meadowbank. And I went down there and they were all sat there with bits. So he got them all to wear elastoplast across their noses. Oh, thanks, guys.
That's brilliant.
Make me feel part of the family.
Love that. And with that, with Daley Thompson, I mean, is it, no, let's not take away from that. With any of the athletes that you've coached as well, I mean, what are some of the kind of things that stand out in champion winning athletes? What are the traits that you would see as a common?
Well, I think this is one of these questions that if you sit down and spend a long time, you could probably work it all out. It'll look all very academic and so on, but they're all different. The one critical thing is they have to have a passion for what they're doing, because I don't care how many coaches think they're motivational and so on. You can't put that into them. It's there or it's not there. From the very beginning, they've got a hunger and a belief that they can get there. And so coming back to Daley, I can't remember if I ever told you this story, when I'd gone across to California to spend a week with him over when he was doing his camp there. And on this particular day, I've been down for 2 or 3 days, and you can imagine you come from the cold of the UK, you're in the sunshine, and my skin was tingling with the sun, and I'm sat there they brought this little villa thing on at Capistrano Beach, right on the beach, so there's a rail where you could put your feet on, or you can jump over, and suddenly you're on the beach, and then there's the Pacific in front of you, and if you look far enough, you'll find Japan. That's where we were. So I was sat there, I had a glass of Budweiser, or can of Budweiser, quite sipping this, and I was looking out at what the world that I was in at that point. And I looked to the right, and I could see the sun melting gold into the Pacific, and I could see these pelicans flying low towards San Diego, and I could hear the dolphins splashing and talking to each other in the shallows. And I was wondering, how on earth am I going to explain to Linda that I was actually working out here? And then out of nowhere, I hear this voice. There's Daley. He says, "Hey, Frankie, who's the greatest athlete you ever saw?" I said, "What do you mean?" So, the greatest athlete of all time. I said, I mean, historically, stuff I've seen in the videos and so on. Yeah, anybody in the whole of history. I said, well, he says, forget it, buddy. You're looking at him. And it's one aspect of that athlete that probably, again, is common in the better athletes, the ones who've the better athletes, the ones who've achieved, world status.
Yeah.
Is belief in yourself, and I often say this when people are doing public speaking and things. I said, if you don't believe in you, don't expect anybody else to.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, and we've got an expression of it. We've got it's not an arrogance. This, we've got a Scottish expression. This, you got to have a good conceit of yourself, right? That is part of our culture.
Yeah.
No, it's not an arrogance.
Yeah.
It's a good belief in yourself.
Yeah. And it was interesting earlier on, just in your career as well. You said there was maybe a bit of imposter syndrome for you,
sure.
but there has to have been a time where that imposter syndrome disappeared and actually belief started to really build and ultimately become, self-belief in your own abilities as a coach.
Yeah, well, and this kind of almost comes back to your question. I was at Meadowbank, and I was coaching. John Anderson was originally the coach to a girl called Myra Nimmo, and Myra, she eventually went on to be the head of sports science at Loughborough, and for the Olympic preparation. So she got really up to top. Anyway, John kind of passed on her, and I worked with her, and she was doing long jump and hurdles. And on this the Scottish Championships, I was on the back straight. I don't know who was speaking to it. I was walking up the back straight, and I heard this roar from the home straight. And I looked across, and there's a guy called Tom Williamson, who's a fantastic coach who taught me an awful lot. He's jumping up and down and waving to me. And Myra had just broken the Scottish record, right? And in doing so, was going to go to the Olympic Games, right? And so I stood there, and that's when I realized, I thought to myself, you can do it. Right? It works. It works. And I'd say this to anybody.
Yeah.
You may not get that position, that status in your own mind immediately, because it takes time to learn things, But if you know you're doing the right thing, if you know you're within principles and so on, and if you're consciously trying to push these principles to achieve things, it may not work tomorrow, but you keep doing it. You keep asking yourself, what could I do better and what could I do differently? And suddenly at one point, what you're doing is not repeating what other people have done.
Yeah.
You're actually creating it yourself.
Yeah.
And you've suddenly leapt from learning to repeat through learning to be, and now you're learning to do. You're actually doing it. And I think that maybe answers both of your questions. at that point. That's that particular light going on.
Yeah.
And it's that magical moment. And I can't believe you've never had that magical moment yourself, by the way. When you suddenly think, I'm okay. I can do this. But up to that point, there's always this little feel. But even now, I mean, I've just had a fantastic session this morning. As you, I don't know if you've ever realized this, but probably the starting point for the next year is here. Because I will try to do something different for you, because you keep inviting me back. I'm quite happy to keep coming, by the way. I try to do something different here. And so you do it, and I find myself, even now, and I've done a few of these things in my life, always asking you, was that okay?
Yeah, you do.
And trying to get something back from you that says, well, actually, Frank, I'd play that video at this point rather than that point, and so on. Because that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because you're never the finished article. That's the bit.
Yeah.
That's where arrogance comes in, when the moment you think you are, you know. And it's one of the things when it comes to selecting people in business and so on, if somebody's sitting in front of you, trying to give you the feeling that they've got it, and there's nobody else you should ask because they're the best person in the world, be careful. They must give you a sense of being coachable and wanting to learn more, right? When I always felt if people are coming to work with me, I'd rather they're saying that they want to learn rather than that they've done it. And Frank, who else could you ask? And so on. I always remember Kelvin Giles was one of my coaches, and his interview tickled me. I said, well, what do you want in life then? Kelvin says, I want your job. And he wasn't even a national coach at this point. I said, I want your job. And that made me think, this guy wants to go somewhere, and he knows that there's always another level that you can go to. It's a little bit like one of your colleagues today asked me about mountains. Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
When you got to the top of your mountain,
what next?
Is that it?
Yeah.
Never is. There's always another mountain to climb. And each mountain is the way I see it is each struggle that we have in life, each mountain that you climb, is preparation for what comes next. Yeah. And none of us like to think about this, but there's always going to be harder mountains in front of you than there are behind you. Right? There's always going to be some serious difficulty. And if you don't practice fighting and taking the challenge, remember what I said about the little girl in that video. Yeah. The reason you seek out challenge is to prove yourself and test yourself to be better.
Frank, we're going to kind of wrap up in a minute. I'm going to leave you to ask your last question that you normally ask people. But before that, there's two things I wouldn't mind saying. First of all, is a massive thank you for the not just for this podcast episode just now, but I think for being an influential person, certainly within my life and coaching career. You know, genuinely, I don't say that lightly. It's a huge thing. And actually, it's interesting. You know, that yes, there's technical aspects of coaching, but actually, it's the people aspects in particular. And I remember, and I think I first heard you at a conference when I was at PepsiCo, and I think that was the first time that you ever gave the phrase. Actually, the two things I want to leave my part with before handing to Alex is it's actually a bit more about parenting and our role as parents. And I'd almost want you to say the words, but you know, you gave me a phrase which is our job as parents is to give our kids that's the start, just as a little, and then there was some advice that I asked for from a parenting point of view, and you then quoted Mark Twain to me. Do you want? Can you remember where I'm trying to take you to?
Yeah, and I'll try to add another one to that. I think as parents, as coaches, as developers of other people, you've got to give them the roots to grow and the wings to fly, right? Because you can't do the growing for them, right? And you certainly can't do the flying for them. And when I say you've got to give them that, I remember a guy who ended up being Air Vice Marshal Chris Moore, who was the head of cyber defence in the UK, pulled me up when I was doing a presentation to young pilots, helicopter pilots, at RAF Shawbury. And I always felt seriously humble speaking to these kids, 20, 21, 22-year-old young men and women who in the next 6 weeks were going to be in Afghanistan in the theatre of war. And some of them would never come home. You know, I used to feel really humble speaking to them. And I spoke about giving, you know, giving the roots of it, giving ownership. And he pulled me to one side and said, Frank, you can't give ownership. They have to take it. You create a process in helping people to grow so that they take ownership out there. And part of doing that, I think, is there's the extra bit I want to add, because I know you'll remember this when I tell you, to remind you, is that I remember, just as part of a story, if you like, I remember my next door neighbour, Barry and Linda. Linda was told my Linda that Zoe, their daughter, was going to be taken up by Linda and Barry to Glasgow to study veterinary science. And I came home this particular night, and my Linda said, "You'll never guess what Linda next door said." I said, "Linda, I've never been able to answer that in my life. I'm not going to be able to answer it tonight." Well, you know, they were going to take Zoe up to Glasgow. I said, "Yes." Well, Linda says that he cried all the way home in the car. And I said, "Well, what a big pussy." I mean, I never thought that. I thought this was a hard guy, you know. Lost a bit of respect to her. Anyway, 2 years later, I'm stood in the car park at St Andrews University, saying goodbye to my elder daughter, Erin. Yeah. And I don't know whether it was a grain of sand or something that blew itself from the beach and lodged itself in my eye, but I was distinctly uncomfortable. And I said to Linda and Cara, my younger, "Say goodbye to Erin, I'll be in the car." And I got in the car, and I was really distressed, and I couldn't work out why. And I started off thinking, you've not prepared her to let go. She's not ready to be let go. And then it dawned on me that it wasn't me that was prepared to let go. As the coach, as the parent, as the leader. And that's where the words from Khalil Gibran's poem, The Prophet, came in. And to paraphrase it, the coach is to the boat. Just to explain, from the book, from the poem, the prophet is leaving a land, and the people of the land realize they're not going to have enough time to ask him questions again, so they better get the questions out now. What's love? What's joy? What's death? What's sorrow? And so on. And one of the questions is, what of parents and their children? And to paraphrase, he says, the parent is to the bow as the child is to the arrow. And I thought, what a fantastic picture that is for parents and for coaches and for leaders and managers, developers of other people. You've got to give your children and those people you develop power, and you've got to give them direction, but you've got to let them go.
Brilliant.
That is what we're all about. But yeah, coming to your other one, when I was working with Boris Becker, Jon Tyriak had asked me to look after his feet and to look after his attitude, because they were fighting each other a bit. And as far as the feet was concerned, I studied a lot on this. I looked at various drills. I invented some fantastic drills that I thought were fantastic anyway. But he was still getting it wrong. Boris kept on falling over his feet. And I thought he was just being perverse at this point. And then it dawned on me I was making the biggest mistake you can make as a coach. Because what you see is a consequence. What you've got to understand is the consequence came from somewhere. What caused it? Can you take that step back? And in his case, it was because from a very young boy, because he was so good at tennis, he didn't have to bother working with his feet, and nobody ever thought to try to get to work on these things. And it's actually if you build on that story, it's one of the big problems you have when you're coaching the superstars who come to international sport. Because they're so good in their premierships and so on, they're so much better and more talented than other people, they probably haven't had to do the basics as well as other people. So when they come to the top end, the national coaches end up very often having to teach them the basics, right? Anyway, John Thiriac phoned me up after a few weeks. He said, "I'd like to meet you in Montpelliano's, Frank, which it doesn't exist now. It's a really beautiful restaurant, very expensive, just opposite Harrods in England, in London." We met there. I said, "Frankie, you've done a good job. His feet are fantastic." I said, "Well, no, really? You've done the job. Thank you. What about his attitude?" I said, "Well, that's a different kind of situation, Jan. But all I can do is give you the advice of Mark Twain when he said, when I was 18 years of age, I couldn't believe how stupid my father was. When I was 21, I couldn't believe how much the old guy had learned in 3 years." And I think that's a lesson for us all when we're bringing up our kids or we're working with the growing athlete or the developer. Sometimes it's just a matter of the right time and being patient for him.
Yeah. Well, that really resonated with me because I still probably get eye rolls from my kids when I'm trying to impart some wisdom, but I'm ever hopeful that it's going in and one day they'll get the lesson, so thanks for that.
Frank, thank you so much for sharing. We always ask all our guests this one last question, which is, what is your guiding principle in all of your coaching? Is there one principle that guides you?
I think probably more than anything else is being straight. I think what we need in all things in life is a culture of constructive candor. Now, I have to say in Scotland, we're not bad at that. We're normally pretty straight with people, right? England, the English people are not quite like that. I mean, I'm not saying they're bad people, but in order to maintain a relationship, to keep things nice, they'll go around the houses a bit and they won't tell you it straight. But I'll tell you something. If you don't have candor, you don't have honesty. And if you don't have honesty, you'll never have trust. If you don't have candor, you won't have accountability. I mean, if I think you guys are getting it wrong, I owe it to you to tell you that and hopefully help you get it right. Why? Because I want you to be the best in the world. You may not always hear from me something that you want to hear personally, but trust me, you'll always hear what you need to hear professionally. And we've got to we've got to be strong in that. And if you don't have accountability, you don't have respect. And I think that is important. That should be your guiding principle. And that is the key to quality communication at the end of the day.
Yeah. Brilliant. Amazing. Frank, thank you so much for taking some time to share with us. And we look forward to having you back next year and hearing even more.
Pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. And hey, to you and to all our friends out there, have a fantastic Christmas. And let's make 2022 and let's make 2025 absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Brilliant. Thanks, Frank.